Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's lecture. My name is Asmaret Askenom. I'm the Associate Deputy Director of the Center for Global Security Research within the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, and I'll be your host today. Our guest speaker is Mike Studeman, and his lecture is titled China in Strategic Context. Mike is an internationally recognized expert on Asian affairs with deep expertise on China. He is a MITRE National Security Fellow and on the board of advisors of the National Bureau of Asian Research. He was previously the commander of the Office of Naval Intelligence in the US government and has led intelligence operations in the Navy, joint national and interagency assignments. Mike's lecture will examine China's strategy, intentions, and decision-making calculus and provide insights into strategic competition and superpower dynamics. In terms of today's format, Mike will take the first half to present, and then we'll use the remaining time for the Q&A session. During his lecture, you can start raising your hands electronically and typing questions into the chat. With that said, Mike, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and over to you.
Great, thanks, Esmeralda, and I want to thank Zach Davis as well for helping to engineer this engagement. Really proud to be here and learned a little bit what was going on in some earlier engagements. And this is my way of sort of giving back and hopefully being helpful. I think when you take a look at the challenges we face, that we've got a significant mountain to climb with regard to great power rivalry. I am inspired about what is going on here. I have to tell you how proud I am to see from a distance kind of how much the labs are making progress in all the key areas. I know that your motto was something like science with a mission. I don't have that kind of technical background. I'm a liberal arts major with a mission, and that is to maybe bring the strategic context and thinking about the kind of the broad view of China and great power dynamics that may be helpful to you. I find there are very few places that I go, even in Washington with the think tanks, where they might give you the sweep of the problem in one go. I've probably been a little ambitious with my presentation too. I've given it to other places while I've been on the West Coast here at the Naval Postgraduate School and in other locations. But I think that we need to connect the dots, and I do my darndest to help in this briefing to do it. It's probably going to generate a lot of questions. It's okay to push back in some areas. I'd love to hear from you in the Q&A, but let me tee up the slides here, and then we can begin and kind of step through some stuff that won't necessarily be uplifting to you in many ways. You might start to get a big weight in your stomach, in fact, but I know that you know the degree of seriousness of this challenge. Before we get to China's strategic context, I want to talk about the macro strategic trends that are impacting every country on the planet right now. And I do think we need to funnel from the big to the small in order to put things properly in the right setting. On this slide, I show you four basic trends. And I was just say that we are looking at a world where each one of these is creating very significant dynamics that will affect every country. The destabilization is something you know well. Taking a look at the Gaza war, the departure of Assad in Syria, Iran's place in it with Hezbollah and Hamas, Yemen, clearly the Middle East doesn't look like it's getting stable anytime fast. Europe with Ukraine and the war there, obviously with ripple effects that have reached the smallest countries on the planet out there, food security, for example. And then all the way to the Indo-Pacific. You know, it used to be the case where you could say that that part of the world needed to be stable, and it was largely stable. And that was a good thing because people forecast it as being the engine of growth of the 21st century economies. And now, based on China's rise, their behavior, you find that, in fact, it is a place where security spirals are in effect and where more countries are spending more on weapon systems, where their fear being caught in the middle between great power competition or of being subject to attack or coercion or gray zone behavior. All of this has created a destabilized Indo-Pacific. That was not the case 10 to 15 years ago, you maybe had Korea every now and again causing some deep concerns, but now across all of the Indo-Pacific, from India all the way to North Korea, you find everybody on tenterhooks. Deglobalization, I think, is largely recognized. We are past peak globalization, and we're not going back anytime soon. In fact, these countries that I showed you up here on the map generally are how the blocks are forming, where people are reshoring, they're friendshoring, they're nearshoring, they're protecting their supply chains, they're looking to other countries they can trust. And so on the red side, you have, there's 4 countries there, but a number of satellite, countries from Belarus to Venezuela to Cuba and Nicaragua. So there's a whole red camp, which is more friendly with one another. It's marked by strategic alliances and relationships, the most recent ones being Russia and Iran, and also Russia and the DPRK. Who would have thought North Korean troops would be out there in Ukraine, right? And so that is a block of powers which is anti-Western, which aims to rejigger the world, that allows them to have their spheres of influence and to be able to be secure, which means that autocracy and authoritarianism needs to be safer for them, and they intend to make it safer for themselves. So that those particular trends, plus the fact that China, as the second largest economy with so much interconnectedness across the globe, decided to essentially take the mercantile path, zero-sum kinds of approaches there. Essentially, it took a couple of decades for the Western world to wake up, but finally people are realizing this isn't a competition. They're not playing by any rules that I know of. This is dog eat dog. And so if I'm being exploited over and over again, then it's time to do something about it. And so that explains many of the policies that you see are being undertaken in the Eurozone all the way to the Five Eyes countries. The third trend is depopulation. People always talk about Chinese depopulation, how that's arcing over. They'll lose 250 million people in the active workforce between now and 2049. That's a very serious hit. By 2100, there may be less than 1 billion people in China. That's what people forecast. But that's not the only society that's facing those kind of trend lines. Most advanced economies are also seeing lower and lower fertility rates, and that has an economic consequence. It also has a consequence for a smaller population, working population, taking care of graying folks who live longer, and the stresses and pressures that puts on social systems and all the rest. So this is a very serious trend that we have to understand. The only place on the planet where population is growing is in sub-Saharan Africa, and it's growing like hotcakes. That compensates for some of the decline. So overall population is growing. It'll go from 8 billion today to close to 10 billion, in decades forward. But unfortunately, the lower populations are happening in the most consequential countries, which will have a bite. And then in the most volatile or the least well-governed, and the place where climate change may impact folks with migrations and instability and the potential of suffering and violence, that's essentially occurring in the heart of the third world. So pay attention, because it will affect everybody out there. And then disinformation is the fourth macro trend. If you can't find the truth, you can't protect the truth, you can't make informed decisions about dealing with any of the things that I just described in a very, very executive fashion. So anyway, these framing trends are very important to be able to understand what we're going to face in coming years. None of them are on a good glide slope. All of them will reinforce one another in negative ways, and we just have to be realistic about what that means for how we accumulate power, how we deploy it, who we deploy it with, okay? Let me get rid of this issue here. The last administration, it was very, very leery of saying that we were in a new Cold War. Today's conditions completely fit the definition that you find in the yellow boxes there. The Cold War parallels are stark. If you don't want to use those terms because they've been stigmatized, you don't want to return to a place like that, then that's okay. Call it a great struggle, which is what Xi Jinping calls it. But essentially, the Cold War definition is met by every criteria. Some would push back and say, well, there's no ideological difference, and I beg to differ with that challenge. The Xi Jinping-led China is rejuvenating, and they believe it in their bones, that Marxist socialism is out to defeat democratic capitalism. And they have seen a revivification of all of those red issues that we thought were dead after Mao Zedong passed. They believe it in their heart of heart, and they've organized as such. You have the Little Red Book. You have Xi Jinping talking about how China is going to be the gravedigger of capitalism, so on and so forth. So ideological views of how mankind should be governed still exist on the planet, and China is leading a different charge with regard to their place in the world and how Marxist socialism, they think, is going to be superior to democracies over the long haul. You can read all those other elements that exist, fear of a great power war with nuclear elements, the greater reliance on allies, the formation of blocs, economic warfare, the distrust, the global south having perhaps a little more agency, operating between red and blue blocs, but they're caught in the middle in many different ways. So this is not necessarily exactly what we face in the 20th century, but it is the same kind of great power rivalry that existed in the 18th century with Great Britain and France, and it's the same as the 20th century with the US, USSR. This is the 21st century, and it's China and the US. The nature is the same, the character is different. So that means you don't apply exactly the same prescription to dealing with it as maybe the last Cold War that we faced, but certainly this is something that you have to understand as a reality of our times. Okay, I thought I would go to this to say sometimes it's useful to register on where have we come in this relationship and why are we suddenly here. I placed up there for you the way that we saw the relationship with China over time since World War II. And you can see that China, when they were allied after World War II with the Soviet Union, at least until their break in the 1960s, that our presidents saw them as the enemy camp, and they saw us certainly the United States as the #1 adversary. When Mao Zedong passed in 1976, Deng Xiaoping took over, and Deng Xiaoping opened up China, and we thought we can now engage. We're going to connect with them, make them richer, and they'll liberalize, and they'll face the middle income trap, and it's going to be just one of those things that every country goes through as they get richer. The people with money want to have more representation in the future of the country, blah, blah, blah. And so this engagement crowd is that whole block of folks that you saw over there in the cooperative partner section. And we did provide, we provided arms, we provided financial assistance out the wazoo. We provided China with an incredible amount of stuff in the 80s and the 90s. The outlier on Bush 41 was June 4th, 1989. That was Tiananmen, when the massacre occurred, and we sanctioned them for a while, but the economy was too attractive. And so we had a lot of people that wanted to end those sanctions too sweet, and essentially went back to sort of the cooperative thing. And we believed in this engagement, this vision for how we thought China was going to evolve for the longest time. It was really only until Trump won when it wasn't Trump having the light and understanding China. It was his advisors who were able to provide some strong advice to say it's time to shift course. And to Trump's credit, he was able to support those folks, and we finally had the wake-up call, and things started to transform, seeing China for what it was. Biden understood, and a lot of his policies were continuity from Trump 1, and Trump 2 may have a lot of continuity here as well. Even as Biden refused to acknowledge this was anything really other than a competition, that's what he used to be able to create a stabilized relationship with China. He did not want us to engage in mutual demonization that essentially would close out any opportunity to cooperate on trade, climate, fentanyl, a variety of different things. And so he wanted to take the high moral ground publicly, and therefore he kept to the competition mantra. Let me just show you where the Chinese were too. So we had this boomerang, but so did the Chinese, right? We've come full circle. In fact, it was Deng Xiaoping who actually ordered the massacre on June 4th, 1989. He became a super hawk and was convinced that we were helping to engineer a transformation where the CCP was going to be kicked out. And from that point onward, I can tell you, was a shift in the way Deng Xiaoping viewed the West. And so the super hawks eventually pushed out all the moderates over time, even the tech smart folks educated in the United States. So now you're back with Xi Jinping, this very pro-Maoist. He made a few mistakes, but he should be upheld as a CCP leader that helped China become what it is today, et cetera. And so the basic point that I want to make is that we've had this sort of long history, but we thought incorrectly that when we engaged China, that it would result in transformation politically. China always thought these things were transactional. You get from the West what you need to grow a strong country with CCP control. It was never in doubt in their minds that they would ever give up an ounce of power the CCP exerts. And this was our big mistake. Okay, some inconvenient truths here. For a while, people were like, oh, they just want to be strong in their backyard, or the regional power. They don't have any global ambitions. Please erase this from your mind. There is a global ambition by the Chinese to take center stage, to be the strongest pole in the multipolar system. They see that their main adversary, the hegemon of today, is the United States, and that we deserve to be displaced, that we're trending on a line of ascending power, that we're more isolationist, we don't deserve to lead anymore based on the poor quality of our choices over time. And so with their friends, different relationships with each country, but loosely you can say what people call the axis of upheaval, or the axis of autocracy, or the axis of revanchism, whatever, that there is a red block which is growing closer to one another, where China is the biggest dog in that camp and is exerting help across many different levels with those countries in order to take, in many places, the pressure off China. If Russia is agitating, and Iran and others, and we are preoccupied and expending our energies in other crises, this is good for China, so everybody's not focused on their own littorals and issues over, let's say, the China Seas or Taiwan or anything else. This is my quote. I have called the Chinese the chief engineer of their own crises, whether it's the one-child policy, whether it's Wolf warrior diplomacy, whether it's securitizing their economy, whether it's their choices on, how they do stimulus. Over and over again, or COVID is a good example. Over and over again, China will claim that everybody else is trying to keep them down and they're the victim, but most of the origins of their problems relate to decisions that they made, including, for example, the activity where they decided to go to war almost with India over the borders there in Ladakh and the Galwan Valley. Chinese decision to initiate that crisis. The problem is that they don't see themselves as really the source of the problem, that they're reacting, they're being defensive to a hostile world, and it's very difficult. I can make a case. I have some slides usually in other briefings where I talk about how deeply penetrated we are. I have a little bit of that, but there's a lot to be said about how much they're exploiting us. We didn't create a problem in Taiwan. They say that we did, but essentially it was Xi Jinping's ambitions to assimilate Taiwan and to accelerate the timeline and then build up in a very rapidly with this awesome military growth in every respect, in every warfare area, that created the reaction of the U.S. helping Taiwan trying to help itself. And so this is totally China's decision to make Taiwan a geopolitical issue that now is stressing the world in terms of what could happen. China believes that over Taiwan, that as much as they want to win without fighting, that a major power conflict may be inevitable, and that's the reason why they've overbuilt in so many different areas. Anyway, lots of things here. You can read it all the way to the end. China has a lot of advantages in the way that we're treating ourselves. Sometimes we're our own worst enemy. A lot to unpack there. We won't have to go too detailed for you to get that point. These are sources of friction from China's rise across the board. Please read it as rapidly as you can. I won't brief everyone, but all of these things, I'm trying to show you the sweep of why China is a problem, right? And so it's not just what they stand for, or what they're doing inside their own country, but if they're exporting what they do as similar externally as internally, control, trying to muzzle voices, not honoring agreements, abetting corruption and bringing corruption in the world, right? Predations, overfishing, overexploiting, not internally their natural resources and their land and their waters, but also now everybody else's externally. These are problems based on China's size and its choices with regard to how to use its capabilities. Bottom left shows you the degree of intellectual property that is stolen from the United States. It's assessed to be $250 billion to $600 billion a year of intellectual property. This has been occurring for multiple decades, and we have failed, although we have some policies we've strengthened in some areas, hardened in others, or maybe more aware of it. But this is one of the reasons why China is so strong today, is because we have failed to protect intellectual property in so many different technical and other areas. There's the disinformation, a globally deployed media ecosystem designed to paint a benevolent view of China, which is active every single day, explaining away their behaviors and knocking Western behaviors. That's how they've chose to emphasize their information instrument, all the way through fentanyl. Fentanyl, by the way, is not allowed to be used in China. It's illegal. Somebody will be taken to jail, but it is subsidized and can be exported. So funny how that works, right? This is one of the few military slides I have, and I used to use this as the Indopacom J2 from 2019 to 2022. And I just wanted to show kind of the rapid growth between 1999 and 2025. I haven't updated a long time. There was way more chips on the right side, way more yellow, which means sort of fifth generation stuff. And I usually point out to audiences when I talk about this is that these forces are designed to guarantee a win for the PRC if they have to resort to war, if we intervene. Most likely scenario is the Taiwan one. But I star the exponential growth of nuclear forces. You guys are more aware of it than anybody else. Richard tried to call it out and say, hey, China's achieving nuclear breakout capability. The triads expanded, the family of nuclear weapons, launch on warning, everything they're doing with expanding the silos, the advances in the missile systems, the penetration, orbital bombardment, targeting, all of those things that have to come together to essentially eliminate the ability of the United States to use nuclear superiority to change the outcome of what happens in a great power conflict. If you can lock out America's use of nuclear weapons and you can always dominate on the escalation ladder, then everything defaults to a conventional fight where China has more advantages in terms of proximity and numbers. That's the calculus, period, stop. So a lot of people I want to talk about, and lots of papers about this, that say, well, it's a deterrent for so many things. A great power needs to have this. It's a natural evolution of a country that wants to be very strong and secure. I would just tell you that based on the writings, there's a lot of application for how the Chinese view the likelihood of war with the hegemon and the need to not let that hegemon win by using any of their own assassin's mace, capabilities. They learned in the 1950s when we threatened to use nuclear war twice, in 1954 and 55, the offshore shelling of Jinmen and Matsu, and also in 1958, we got out of those crises and stood Mao down because we threatened nuclear use. We forget that, China doesn't, and they will not go through that again. And so this is essentially the nuclear growth is a sufficiency issue with regard to achieving the nuclear threshold that gives them mutually assured destruction-like capabilities where Washington has to face the choice whether or not over Taiwan they want to lose Washington, LA, New York, Chicago, whatever. Okay, so it's fairly simple when you take a look at how the Chinese approach this. And of course, we don't know where their nuclear program will actually end, but we know it's going to be way, way more than minimal deterrence, which it had been for so long. Okay, it would be okay if some countries built up their military and simply had them sort of resident for defense only. This is China exercising its power and showing a little taste of what the world will look like when China is strong, confident, and has the ability to deploy hard power and use it for sharp power, right, effects. And this is what's happening in the South China Sea, parts of the East China Sea around the Senkakus. And so this is just a little glimpse. And the Chinese believe that they're being restrained with all of this, that they didn't sink and kill Filipinos after all. You should admire my strength and my ability to not let this get out of hand. Meanwhile, right, you have all the stuff that's being normalized. And so the region is becoming more and more fearful of what China intends to do as they put more and more material into the first island chain. Their intent is to get effective control, and they will do anything to get de facto effective control. And they believe that fly-by-night U.S. presence is not going to be able to truly make a difference in the long run if they actually are there everywhere all the time. This is a picture of the anti-ship ballistic missile ranges at the unclassified level. For a time, of course, we could say for the Navy, our surface force is going to have to be careful if we're inside the DF-21 or the DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missile range. But now, of course, the Chinese have been extending those ranges. The arrows can fly, much farther, including almost to Pearl Harbor. If you take a look at some of the advanced hypersonic glide vehicles that they've developed, small numbers growing bigger. And so this is a problem for us. They intended it to be the Heisman that keeps us from getting to the fight. You have to fight to get to the fight, essentially, where we don't have them under the guns with what we're bringing in, but we're essentially in the weapons exclusion zone almost everywhere. And in fact, their long-range plans include holding us at risk even as we come off the west coast of the United States. And so they support this with thick ISR satellite systems. They expect us to attack and take out big chunks of them, but they want to have enough resilience and redundancy to be able to get a glimpse enough to be able to fire these missiles out and essentially make it too difficult for us to fight. So it's anti-axis area denial. You can't win this fight with submarine forces alone if it comes to it. And so, we're desperate to have our new concepts and to look at operating inside the weapons exclusion zone. That's a very, very big challenge. Okay. My next slide is one to say, how did we get to the point where all of a sudden the PLA has these kinds of capabilities? We could have gone into any other warfare area. I just gave you a representative example. And here is the lack of appreciation for essentially the leakage that occurs from us to China. So these are my simple PowerPoint graphics. So I know they're a little Fisher Price, but imagine that our U.S. R&D essentially is in that bottom left city-looking thing with the American flag. That R&D complex, that ecosystem is incredible. It's got cutting edge, this, that, and the other. But getting over the Valley of Death, you see these men and women carrying backpacks slowly across, and hopefully that that rope bridge doesn't sway too much because people are going to be falling into the Valley of Death. That happens all the time, and it's multiple year. The only way to get stuff into the military fast these days is by going around the system. That's the Rapid Capabilities Offices. That's the Strategic Capabilities Office. That's the Defense Innovation Unit, right? We are our own worst enemy. Thank you, McNamara, for creating our PPP&E system. Okay, that would have been a problem of our own making, which maybe we could solve over time, but we haven't solved this one. And that is that our R&D base is permeable. It's been penetrated, it's been actively exploited, and continues to hemorrhage our IP up into the Chinese R&D equivalent. And what's waiting there are massive innovation parks, massive subsidies. This industrial espionage feeds into people we trained by and large, and they have twice the number of STEM PhDs as we do, 8 times the number of engineering BS grads. There are no dummies. Underestimate it at your own peril. And so here's the thing, you've got the intellectual property theft, you've got the legal transfer of tech secrets for people when they do the devil's bargain of dealing with the Chinese market. The Chinese are very adept at buying stakes in American and Western companies, just enough to get targeted tech. And they still manage to have a lot of these conversations at the scientific level about things that are unclass, right? But they are able to operate inside our labs, tech centers, and academic institutions here. And we haven't had a national dialogue about what we're going to need to do to protect our values and still protect our IT. There are many types of people that are involved in transmitting this stuff, not just a guy on a keyboard in China, coming after our clear defense contractors. We're talking about, some of them are agents, MSS, MPS. Some of them are profiteers. They're just Chinese Americans that come, they get enough intellectual property that they know if they take it back and sell it, they get a good job back in China. It wasn't state directed, but they do it as a matter of routine because they can. They're profiteers. And then there are folks that are actually targeted, they're approached, and their ethnic loyalty convinces them that they should do something. They're not coerced, they're just encouraged because they know where they're placed, and they will end up handing stuff over. And then there are people who are of Chinese American descent that are approached, and they are targets of blackmail. They don't want to do business with China, but their families are still there, and their brothers threatened with not being able to get a job, or the social credit system is going to be reduced for their mother, or they can't get the medical treatment. Those kinds of things are also used to be able to essentially hook into the technology, right? And then, by the way, completely legal, you've had VC venture capitalists throwing in $3 trillion a year, or $3 trillion total over the last 20 years, which does help your technical R&D base significantly. Okay. That's the dilemma. As a country, we haven't faced this. FBI's trying its damnedest. Organically, we're trying to discipline ourselves in significant ways, but the nation doesn't Silicon Valley does not appreciate this for what it is. And so long as we continue to say to ourselves, I'm just going to drive my innovation car faster, that's the way I'm going to defeat the Chinese. I'll always have that edge of freedom-loving people who can do, dynamic things in a very innovative environment. If the Chinese are in the backseat of your car, it doesn't matter how fast you drive it, they're still there. So anyway, so long as this persists, you can expect a fast-following China with a very strong S&T base, with a better ability to manufacture at scale that will essentially be running circles around the United States of America. Okay, shifting gears. People talk about Taiwan. I have to cover it. Sometimes I'm really sick of kind of bringing it up, but I think it's useful to just touch on a few points. The last administration would say war with China is neither imminent nor inevitable. They were downplaying the issues, even though privately we know how serious we were about preparing for it. And so the second phrase that I added is, hey, it's not unthinkable nor improbable. In fact, the probabilities have gone up significantly. And that's why we call this a decisive decade, and why we're very troubled, particularly in the back half of the 20s, maybe early 30s, about what could happen. Let's delve in with this a little bit. If you're looking at timing, look, the 2027 deadline was for the PLA to meet certain marks and to give Xi Jinping options there, but it wasn't an iron countdown to, hey, the May of 2027, we're crossing the strait. That's not how the Chinese think. That's not what we are aware of here. Xi Jinping regrets putting those timelines out there. Let me just kind of unpack this a little bit. Between now and 2027, because they view Taiwan as going on the wrong course, there are more and more Taiwan young people that identify not as Chinese, but as Taiwanese. They think that de facto independence is essentially being more secure, every year. They are trying to reverse things, arrest a negative trend, and they are trying to shape the issues to be able to make the DPP look like they're not the party for people to vote for because it causes more pressure on Taiwan, and they are doing a number of different things that I'll show you on the next slide to be able to shape their preparations for more extreme measures. Xi Jinping needs to have a guaranteed great third term, or good enough, to get his fourth term. If he's going to do a big gamble and the PLA may not be prepared and they fail on a Taiwan gamut, then he's not going to get his fourth term. So essentially, that's another reason why somewhere in the 5-year term from 2027 to 2032, when he's essentially like 76 or 75 to 79, something in that age range, is probably going to be our greatest period of concern. This is the day-to-day, right? When I was out there in INDOPACOM, they started to break the norms of crossing median line in the Taiwan Strait with air, going through the air defense identification zone in the bottom left, and now they're operating, more frequently, more intensely, more complex maneuvers on the east side of Taiwan, all the way around, in fact. And the reasons are listed here. Go ahead and read through them to see that there are both strategic, political reasons why you do this, and there are operational reasons why. You give your forces an ability to train in realistic wartime op areas. You're conditioning your adversaries to see you in great numbers close in, which reduces indications and warning. You're able to send strategic signals that it's futile for Taiwan to resist because they can be isolated and cut off. It sends a signal to Washington about the seriousness with which they view Taiwan's trajectory. All of those things are in play today. I just wanted to kind of share that it's not just one thing. Okay, this just shows you the list of all preparations for war that are in place. They're headed on a war footing. It's not something that's controversial in terms of that's not happening, but seeing in one place should give you a sense that they are preparing their population. They're looking at the lawfare elements to rationalize, justify going against Taiwan if it refuses to engage in assimilation talks. The people on the Politburo matter, including Eastern Theater Military Region Commander, somebody who just came off that job. The modernization is happening. The Taiwan preps are very clear. You're seeing the hospitals. You're seeing all the preps with regard to insulation of the economy. Stockpiling of this, that, and the other. So this is real. On this side of the United States, we are not preparing our people the way that China's preparing those. They know that there's a great struggle on a major test, high winds, perilous seas ahead. That's the kind of stuff that Xi Jinping says all the time. So anyway, this is something that we just have to recognize for what it was. What it is. And unfortunately, you thought that the Ukraine war was going to teach him that that's not going to be something they can easily pull off. But I would just say that the lessons they've learned operationally are being factored into improving their ability to do combat operations. Secondly, that they've seen the mistakes that Russia made in terms of the early moves, but they also saw that at the end, that if a country is able to endure with greater will and staying power over a sovereignty issue, that they can make their motherland bigger, or they can recapture parts of the motherland that should be in the motherland. The ultimate outcome, if there's an armistice over Ukraine, that leaves now not just Crimea, but big strips of the eastern Ukraine in Russia's hands, would suggest that in fact that may be worthwhile. But PRC needs to be prepared for the sanctions playbook, and they are absolutely hardening their economy, looking at their own supply chains, so that when we throw our sanctions playbook, they're better able to endure it. We're pressed for time. I've been told I got about 5 minutes left. Let me just talk about competing short of war in strategic rivalries. This is where we stand with comprehensive national power, where the U.S. has more than China, but there are only two superpowers right now. I guess you call it Eurozone a collection, that might have the ability to also be strong, but not one entity. Then the middle powers, right, that are in there. And so it looks like we may be okay. If you're more free and you have more countries that are doing well, that's really, really good. What I wanted to point out on all this, and the reason why people are so concerned, is that statistic of comprehensive national power doesn't necessarily mean you're converting it to ready deployable power. We have better latent power. Our statistics are better in terms of territory, technology, GDP, population, et cetera. It doesn't matter if you don't convert those advantages, which are native vital edges, into real crap. right? You have to convert these into the ways and means to get your ends. China, Russia, others understand that they need to do that. That's the reason why their manufacturing is incredible. That's the reason why they're investing in super intelligence and all these decision technologies. It's the reason why they have been touting that their government is way more effective, because they can make decisions in a timely manner to be able to actually convert whatever latent power they have into the military instruments to get your way. And this has been the baseline problem. We often talk about the defense industrial base, in isolation, but there are other codependencies for how you need to convert power that challenge us, that are less challenging than the Chinese. And so this is the real problem we have. And we recognize that there's way more stuff that the Chinese have to throw at the game. And in fact, on the next slide, I'll show you that they're using all of their stuff in a more orchestrated manner where they actually value diplomacy. They value information. They value the soft power of the culture. So their financial tools may not be as large as ours, but we devalue information. We devalue, a la 30 ambassadors that the Senate couldn't find the power to confirm in the Biden administration. Right? We devalue those things, like we're skeptical about U.S. aid, we're skeptical about international institutions, et cetera. So we have essentially hobbled ourselves here, and we tend to resort to using military, economic, and financial tools, and we don't have sort of the balanced portfolio. So the speed of using your tools and the fact that you can use all of them to get your way, the definition of power, by the way, is getting your way, is something that the Chinese are very astute in. Even with all their deficiencies, even with all their problems, they know how to get their power converted to something that can get the end effects. I believe that the Dyneville concept, the diplomatic, military, economic, financial, intelligence, law enforcement, that the eye actually shouldn't be alone, that the eye actually has exponential effects and should be laid across all of those instruments, because each of those instruments are dependent upon them to be effective. And in fact, you can get amplified instrumental power by using information better. And so this is why I think some people recognize it with all of the AI, ML, supercomputing, all the rest. People sometimes look at that through the wealth generation lens. But in terms of government exercising power, the answer is that every one of your instruments is going to be incredibly more powerful if you can harness innovation on the information side better, and you're weaker if you don't recognize this, okay? And let me just go to the end here on summary points because I'm at the 45-minute mark. You can kind of read those. I have more to say on so many issues. I had slides in here that showed what the Chinese are saying about America to the world, which you probably don't appreciate as much because it's not necessarily coming into your inboxes, and then what they say about themselves as an example of how narrative power resonates and grows global influence or erodes global influence. As we play this more isolationist inward game, China is laughing to the bank because they know that gives them more vacuums to be able to further extend their influence. And this will matter in the end. If you're talking about superpowers, who has more influence on the world scene will make the difference between the values, the security, the market access, et cetera, that our country has long enjoyed, which maybe we've taken too much for granted. Okay, I rushed through it. I am now eager to take your questions and commentary, so fire away, Gridley.